Thank you for visiting. Today we're going to have a little fun with our subscribers and our viewers to see how well you know the investigative business and how well you could actually do an investigation. We're going to have a little 10-question quiz to see how much you know about doing an investigation, researching records. Most of this has to do with background checking and asset searching. Some of it's fraud investigation. So let's see how well you do in answering these multiple choice questions about doing the type of investigations and research that a licensed private investigator might do. And again, it's just for fun. It's not to prove what you know or don't know, or to see how bad of a score you could get. It's to give you an idea of what types of things are searched and might give you some insights into how an investigation is performed. So let's jump right in. First question is, where would you find real estate records? Multiple choice. 4 possible answers. A, tax assessor. B, clerk of court. C, a title abstractor. Or D, Zillow. So we'll give you a couple seconds after each one to think of an answer, formulate an answer. If you want more time, you can hit pause and give you some more time. So let's take a look at this one. This one is where if you would find the real estate records, the answer is B, the clerk of court. In most counties, the real estate records are kept at the clerk of court. Sometimes it's called the recorder of deeds, but it's part of the clerk of court. And the reason why it's important is to overlook question or answer A. In many cases, a researcher will look at the tax assessor or tax collector's records to find out the owner of a property. And that's a big mistake because the tax assessor might be the owner of the property, and a lot of times it is. But there are instances where the tax assessed name is not the legal owner. For example, if a property was recently transferred, sometimes it takes 6 months. Sometimes some counties only update once a year. In some instances, you'll find that there is a registered agent who handles their taxes. Maybe the owner has an accountant. Maybe they have an attorney that handles their taxes. Look, you can put anybody down for the person who pays taxes. It does not have to be the property owner. So where you want to go is to the actual deed books. The deed books are kept at the clerk of court or the recorder of deeds. There are 3,611 counties in the country. Each one does it a little differently, but normally it's called the clerk of court or recorder of deeds. So that's where you're going to find your actual real estate ownership records. Question number 2, if a company has a UCC filing, how is a copy obtained? An UCC filing is usually a credit matter where a company is owed money or they're pledging to owe money. And this is a good source of records for a corporation to see if they have any accounts receivable. If somebody owes them money, it's an asset that they can be collected against. Sometimes you want to know if there are other debtors besides you for a company. So where would you find those records? A, business credit report. B, a Dun & Bradstreet report. C, a 10K filing. Or D, the Secretary of State. Business credit report, Dun & Bradstreet, 10K filing, Secretary of State. So this one, the answer is D. And again, most of these answers, I shouldn't say most, but these answers are going to be what is most true most of the time. Are there exceptions to all these? Sure there are. I'm not here to try to debate exactly every single time. This is more for fun to kind of give you an idea of where you would usually find these or where you want to look first. Sometimes you may look at more than one place. But in most states, the Secretary of State is the entity that retains UCC filings. Some states actually do it in the courthouse, but most states do it Secretary of State. So again, 50 different states, might be 50 different ways it's done, but most of the time, Secretary of State is where you want to start. Even if it's not kept there, you want to start there so you can get the corporate records from the Secretary of State and then trace that to the UCC filings. Dun & Bradstreet business credit reports might have some information, but only those that were reported electronically. It's not going to have all of them. 10K filings for a public company probably won't have all of the UCCs. Question number 3, which is the best way to get a bank account record? This is probably the most common type of request for the practice areas that we do. How do I get bank accounts? Where do I get a bank account? Information on a debtor, on a subject. So the first one is send a rebate check. This is where you send a check to the person you're trying to investigate, like a rebate check. This is, hey, congratulations, thanks for doing business with us. Here's your check for $10 for your rebate. Buy from us again. And they sign it, they cash it, they deposit it in their bank, and then you get a copy of that check back, and you see what their bank account is, right? And you make up a company name with a P.O. box so it looks official, number one. Number two, you call the bank and pretend to be the customer. Hey, this is Joe Schmo. I want to, get my balance, and you get that information that way. C, you monitor SWIFT codes. SWIFT codes are a way that banks exchange information from one another. Anytime you check a balance, you cash a check, you make a deposit, it creates a SWIFT code that interchanges between banks, and you monitor those for activity to find the bank account. And D, you get copies of account statements from the trash in the carport of the person. So you go through their trash, you pull out their bank statements, and you find out their bank information that way. Called a trash pull. Which one do you think is the best way to get a bank account record? A, B, C, or D? Rebate check, call the bank, SWIFT code, trash pull. For this one, the correct answer for best way is C. The reason why is because answer C is typically known as what's called a GLB compliant method. GLB stands for Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, meaning that it's legal. Right? It's a way you can obtain these records legally, according to the providers from the SWIFT codes. SWIFT is a private enterprise that creates all these relationships with banks, and if you can get the information from them, it's typically known as GLB compliant. Let's look at the other ones, why they're included. Send a rebate check. That's false pretexting, right? You're using a fake representation of a rebate check. They didn't get any rebate. It's not real what you're saying. To get personal financial information. That is the definition of GLB violation, Graham-Leach-Bliley Act. You can't do any legal pretext. You can do a fake story, but you can't do it to get private financial information or protected information. So rebate check, that's typically a no-no. Number two, call the bank and pretend to be a customer. Same thing. That's illegal pretexting. Now, what about D? What about getting copies of account statements from the trash in the carport? Well, the trick question part of this is trash in the carport. In most jurisdictions, you can do a trash pull, but the trash has to be out. It's called curtilage, meaning that if the trash is in their carport still kind of retained in, you can't get that trash. That trash still belongs to the party. If it's put out in the street for the trash man to pick up, now in most cases it's fair game. Laws vary from state to state, and there might even be, even within a state, a question about, is it have to be outside the curb, is it on the curb, is it on their grass, and some of that can be subject to interpretation. So the key to this is says in the carport. If it's in the carport, you can't walk up into the yard and start pulling trash. Right? If it's out in the street, maybe you can, but the best way, according to this question, the way it's worded, best way is to do SWIFT codes. Question number, I believe this is 4 or 5. I don't have them numbered on my list, but it'll be numbered on the video. Who can find out about vehicle ownership? How can you find out the owner of a vehicle using the license plate or VIN number? Who can find out about vehicle ownership? A, only the police. B, a licensed private investigator. C, it is public information. D, anyone with a permissible use. Who can find out about vehicle information? A, police, licensed investigator. B, public knowledge. C, or permissible use. D. Give you a couple seconds to think about it. Again, press pause if you want more time. Again, this is no right or wrong. We're not debating the issues. This is just most of the time, most common kind of guidelines. So for this question, the answer is, spin the wheel, D, anyone with a permissible use. So what about vehicle records? Vehicle records are different than real estate records. They're different than aircraft records, vessel records. Vehicles are protected under a federal law called the DPPA, Drivers Privacy Protection Act, meaning that it's actually illegal for the DMV, and that's where the records are kept at the Department of Motor Vehicles, to release information to a third party unless there's a permissible use. And every state DMV has a form you fill out, a DPPA request form. It's kind of like a Freedom of Information Act reform. I want this data. I want this record. And you have to give them a good reason. You have to sign an affidavit saying, look, I'm using it for this reason. I'm not lying to you. I'm not going to use it for identity theft. I'm not going to use it to stalk somebody or harm them. I need it for this reason. And usually there's 7 reasons on the form. Why is there 7? Well, the actual federal law, the DPPA, has 7 permissible uses. And so most states just copy those onto their form and make you pick one. So if you have a permissible use, anybody can get it. Private investigator can get it, private citizen, attorney. There are some limitations. They don't necessarily make it easy. It's not public information. A licensed private investigator can get it, but so can you, as long as you have a permissible use. And it's not only the police. In fact, there are some instances where you could get information about a vehicle where a police officer could not. And think about that. You might have more rights than a police officer in getting information. Let me give you a scenario. Let's suppose that you are in a lawsuit. You're suing somebody because their dog bit you and you want to sue them in small claims court. As part of that lawsuit, you want to check their assets, check their bank accounts, their real estate, and you want to check their vehicles. So you want to run a title check with the DMV to see what car does this person own, what vehicles do they own. So you can fill out a DPPA form, you check off the box, ongoing active litigation, sign it, send it in, you can get the information. Can a police officer get information about that vehicle? Not without a reason. Now, if they're following somebody or pulling somebody over, they can look it up on their computer. But their use of that DMV computer is limited to use for law enforcement purposes. They can't do it to check on their neighbor, to find out the name of the person that, gave them the middle finger or anything like that. They can't do that. But you could do it for permissible uses. So keep that in mind. Number, I believe, 6, maybe 5, maybe 6. Where do you check for employment records? If you want to know where somebody works, what their current employment is, where's the best place? And I should have put that in the question. Where's the best place to check for employment records? Surveillance, social media, LinkedIn, or SSA, Social Security Administration. Where's the best place to check for employment records? Give you a little hint. This is kind of a trick question. Might give you a hint how to answer it. Ding, ding, ding. Time's up. So where do you check for employment records? Well, in reality, any one of them. All 4 of these are usable. Employment records, there's not a central database or a central place to search. Type in somebody's name, hit enter like a Google search, and it pops up where do they work. Employment relationships are private. If Joe Schmo works for XYZ company, there's no requirement that has to be put in a database somewhere. Now, there are certain employment divisions, employment laws, people have to file for taxes and things like that, but the company doesn't have to report it anywhere other than for their payroll. So that's where SSA comes in. Social Security Administration, they take deductions, FICA and other things from your paycheck. They have records of where people work. You may not be able to access those easily. You might have to fill out some forms and maybe a subpoena, depending on the use of it, but that's a source. For most investigations, the best, fastest, easiest way is the top 3. Do surveillance to just see where they go to work every day. They go to work at, Bob's Air Conditioning, that's where they work. Maybe it's on social media. You see pictures of them going to work, or they talk about where they work, or they checked in from their work. LinkedIn, most people, if they have a LinkedIn page, put down where their current employment is. So for a typical beginning of an investigation without subpoenas and court orders and everything else, 1, 2, and 3, put those together, and that's going to be your primary source. There's no database where you can just pull up employment records without going through legal channels. Speaking of legal channels, question number 7, I believe. What is an FBI background check? FBI background check. Everybody's heard of it. Everybody knows it. You've talked about it. Some of you have even requested it. What's an FBI background check? A, it's a full criminal record of a person. B, a record search used by employers. Before they hire you, they run an FBI background check for employment purposes. C, it's a fake made-up phrase. Doesn't mean anything. Or D, it's an online database where you can search for criminal records. A, full criminal records. B, employment search. C, made up, fake name. D, it's an online database. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. FAA background check. Answer, you know what? It's really C, a fake made up phrase. Fake made up phrase. The FBI doesn't even call it an FBI background check. Now, there are criminal record searches that government and law enforcement performs. Some of that research, they check with the FBI, but that's not the only place they search. Because the FBI doesn't have all the records. And even though they might have most of the records, it's not something that's really searched unless you are a police officer investigating a crime. So let's say that you are a detective at a sheriff's office and you think somebody might have committed the crime or they've been arrested and you want to check their priors. You're going to run a couple different searches. There's the NCIC, National Crime Information Computer, and that has criminal records. That's not an FBI background check. It's not even called FBI background check. The FBI does consolidate some criminal records, but they don't have everything. Some local records may not make it to the FBI for a long time, right? So it's really not a thing, right? You don't ever want to ask for an FBI background check because it's going to show that you don't really know what the criminal records are. Criminal record searches are done at many levels. There could be local records, somebody arrested in a city for spitting on the sidewalk. There could be state level records, somebody committed, larceny in the state or murder. It could be federal records, some narcotics records are federal. And all three of those have different layers that can be checked. There's inmate searches. There's no full criminal record search that most private entities, companies, citizens can do in one place. You have to search multiple places. Employers, what about B? Well, employers, in most cases, they're not allowed to run criminal record searches per se. Sometimes if it's a certain type of a job and it requires some honesty or security, they can run background checks on criminal records, but a lot of states have prohibited that. And D, it's not online. These things are not online records or paper documents you have to pull from courthouses. So question number, 7 or 8, where we're at now. What is an internet domain name? What is an internet domain name? We'll talk about why that's important, why it's a valuable consideration for asset searches, internet domain name. Is it A, an IP address for a website? IP stands for Internet Protocol. Is it intellectual property? B, is it C, the corporation that runs an internet company? Or is it D, GoDaddy? IP address, intellectual property, corporation running an internet company, or GoDaddy? 3, 2, 1. Answer, it is B, intellectual property. An internet domain name is a website address, xyz.com, our website, activeintel.com, google.com. That's the domain name. Anything .com, .net. Some now they have countries .co, .io, .tv. Any internet domain name. And the reason internet domain names were created was to make it simpler than using an IP address. A is IP address. Every computer has a numerical address for that computer. So wherever that website is, let's say for Google's website, has a number attached to that computer. But that number can be 10, 15 characters long, 104.24.108. Right? No one's going to remember that number. So in the early days of the internet, they came out with internet domain names that will make it easier for people to remember how to get to that web page. They can type that in rather than remember, what's the number? 104.8, right? So IP address is what's underneath the domain name. The domain name actually points to an IP address, so they're two different things. It's not the corporation that runs an internet company, and it's not GoDaddy, but GoDaddy is what's called a registrar. GoDaddy is the place where you register a domain name. If you want a domain name for your company, joescoffeeshop.com, you think of the name. If it's available, you go to GoDaddy, you register it, you pay them $10 a year, and you have the domain name. Why is it important to know about where those are registered? Because if you're doing an asset search, one of the most valuable assets that a person has is their domain name. It may not be valuable to you as a creditor, but that person probably doesn't want to lose their domain name. So if you're doing an asset search, don't overlook that name. You might think, well, it's only $10 a year. I can't do anything with it. It's not any value to me. But if that person owes you $50,000 and you threaten to attach their domain name and file a notice with the registrar, well, now maybe they're going to negotiate with you because that's where all their business comes from, their email, their databases, everything's in that website. They might not want to lose it. So it's something that you can use for leverage. Get good legal advice. Remember, this whole thing is not trying to give you legal advice, telling you to do something wrong. Verify all this. Get good legal advice from an attorney before you take action. Disclaimer. Star. Next one. If a person or somebody puts assets into another person's name to hide them, what is this called? Meaning that if somebody owes you money and they have $50,000 in the bank and they give it to their cousin and say, look, put it in your bank account so this person can't find it. Or let me buy a house in your name so nobody knows that it's my money. What is that called? Is it A, fraudulent conveyance? Again, that's a legal term. B, is it a constructive trustee? C, is it bad faith litigation? Or D, all of the above? Is it fraudulent conveyance A, constructive trustee B, bad faith litigation, or D, all the above? Somebody putting assets in another name to hide it from you as a plaintiff in a case or judgment. Answer, all the above. If a person hides assets, it could be construed as a fraudulent conveyance, meaning that that conveyance or conveying that asset to somebody else was done under fraud, so it's fraudulent. So the reason that an attorney, again, good legal advice, disclaimer, is that you want to make sure that the attorney knows what they're doing, and if it is a fraudulent conveyance, that they claim that to the court so that the court can try to undo that. It can go to that third party and say, no, put that money back in their account because it's really theirs if it's fraudulent. Or our client is going to take it from you anyways. B, constructive trustee. This is another legal theory that you want to make sure that is being considered. A trust, if you put something in a trust, let's say if you have real estate or retirement assets and you want to put it in a trust, for asset protection for your kids or maybe to transfer it to other people, whatever. That's done all the time. People have trusts all the time, retirement trust or wills or trust, that kind of thing. But if somebody just puts money into somebody else's name, they didn't really create a formal trust, but in effect, they did the same thing. They put the money elsewhere. And so it's called a constructive trust. In constructive terms, it's a trust even if it's not done formally. So you want to have an attorney try to request that the court says, yeah, this is a trust for all intents and purposes. B, bad faith litigation, same thing. If you're in litigation and you claim to the court that you have no money, but you really do because it's hidden, that's bad faith, and that could be something that the attorney would use. Again, good legal advice. All right, last couple, getting to the home stretch. Which one of these can a private investigator do legally that a private citizen cannot do? What can a PI do that you can't do legally? A, use a telephoto lens to see inside of a window. B, record a conversation on the street. C, access bank records. Or D, do surveillance on a spouse. And I'll give you a hint for this one, maybe more than one of them. So you don't have to just pick one. There could be more than one. What can a PI do legally that you can't do? You have no right to do it. Is it use a telephoto lens to see inside of a window, record a conversation, get bank records, or do surveillance on a spouse? 3, 2, 1. Answer, all of them. Wait a minute. Is that true? A private investigator can do pretty much the same thing you can do. So what does that mean? Well, some of these things nobody can do. Private investigator can't use a telephoto lens to see inside of a window. You can't either. Expectation of privacy inside the window, even if the curtains are open, naked eye, if you can see it, great. Telephoto lens, probably not. Every state's a little different, check the laws, but that's in most cases what the deal is. So private investigator can't do it. You can't do it either. Record a conversation on the street. If it's a third party to the conversation, in most states, nobody can do it. Private investigator can't do it. You can't do it. Access bank records. Well, that one's the opposite. Both of you can do it. You can access bank records. So can a private investigator. So neither one of these is something a private investigator could do that you can't do. Either you both can't do it, or you both could do it. D is the possible exception. Technically, anybody can do surveillance, right? As long as it's for yourself, right? You can't charge somebody to do surveillance unless you're a licensed investigator. But it's very, very, very bad advice for you to do your own investigation on your spouse, because it could be construed as stalking. You're better off hiring an investigator who knows the laws about surveillance, making sure that they're doing it the right way, they're not breaking any laws, they're not going on private property, they're not harassing somebody. You know, there are instances where somebody wants to do surveillance and not do it discreetly. They want the person to be seen. They want them to get caught. They want them to know that somebody's watching them, to harass them, to scare them. And if you're a private investigator, you'll know better than to do that. You don't want to get caught on purpose. Granted, if it happens, it happens. But if you're doing it on your own and somehow they see you, which they probably will because they know who you are, they know what your car is, that they could go right to the court and say, this person's stalking me. It wasn't surveillance, it was stalking. You can get in big trouble. So if you are going to do surveillance, it's probably better to have an investigator do it. In some states, it's just flat out illegal to investigate another party on your own. If it's a counterparty to a case that you have a case against, litigation, divorce, you can't do it. Home stretch, number 10. A private investigator must do all of these things except which one? A, carry insurance and a surety bond for coverage. B, work on a contingency basis with clients. C, have 3 to 5 years experience. Or D, carry an official security division ID. What must a private investigator do except? Which one thing is not a requirement? So most states, most investigations, you have to have insurance or a surety bond or both to get an investigator license. You have to have insurance to make sure that if you do anything wrong, then people can be covered. You have to have a surety bond to make sure that if you do something that creates liability, that the person can get paid. We'll skip over B because that's the right answer. C, have 3 to 5 years experience. Most states, in order to get an investigator license, you have to have prior experience as an investigator. Well, that sounds like a catch-22. In order to be an investigator, you have to have already been an investigator. Well, most times it's you work for a private investigative agency for 3 to 5 years, you got signed off on your hours, and then you can apply on your own license. Or you worked in law enforcement. You work as a police officer, and that's your experience. D, carry official security ID. In most states, if you're a licensed investigator, you have to have your license on you at all times. Now, you can't carry a badge that looks like a police badge. You can't represent yourself as law enforcement. You can't look like law enforcement. But you have to have an ID that says, here's my investigator license, and you have to show it if asked in certain scenarios. So what does B have to do anything? Work on a contingency basis. This is the opposite. In most states, it's illegal for a private investigator to do work for a client on a contingency payment basis, meaning that they can't say, I'll take the case, and if you get the assets, you can pay me, or if we win the case, you can pay me, or you only have to pay me if the results are good. The reason that, unlike attorneys, the reason that the states put that law in the books is because they don't want investigators to make stuff up. They want them just to find the actual facts, things that are true, so they can sign their investigative report that says, this is the true facts, this is what I found, without any pressure to make it come out a certain way. Because if they're on contingency and they're only going to get paid if it comes out a certain way, well, they might be tempted to do things that don't show the other side or that are just flat out lies, right? So most states have laws on the books that say you cannot work on a contingency basis with a client. And contingency includes things like a bonus payment or upgrade payments or anything else. There are some exceptions to that, but in most states, private investigator just has to be paid whether the news is good or bad, right? So if you're a client and you want to find out if this person is cheating on you, you have to pay them whether they are or not. And it's good for the investigator too, because what if they're not? You did all that work for nothing. Same thing with assets. Well, I'm only going to pay you if you find the assets. Well, what if they don't have any assets? I can't make them up. We can't make up the fact they have assets. So contingency basis, normally a no-no in most states as far as client agreements and contractual relationships with clients. Hopefully this was fun. Again, it's not designed to like nitpick and like prove you're wrong and prove we're right. It's designed to give you an idea of what happens with investigations, where records are found, and some of the common misconceptions, because a lot of times those misconceptions make it harder for a client to get done what they want to get done. If you really know how it works, a lot of times you can get better results, whether you're doing your own investigation or having an investigator do it. And getting good results is really the objective of all the parties involved. So knowing how the investigations work and whether you're doing it yourself or if we're doing an investigation for you, knowing what's going on behind the scenes will help you have a better understanding of how we get to the final conclusion that we get to, that you can use in your case to give you the peace of mind to know exactly what's going on with the question you have or the objection you're trying to accomplish. Thanks for watching. Click the like button if you liked it. Feel free to contact our website. We love hearing from you, and we'll see you on the next video.